Okay. Okay, let's open in a word of prayer here. Let me get my thing set. Okay, let's pray. Lord, thank you for this day. We pray you'll bless our time together today as we try to talk through some things that are happening in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world that are related to Bible prophecy. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, so today I'm going to focus mainly on Israel, Middle East, and some of the things going on there. If I have time, I'll go into some of the other things that I have that relate to World Economic Forum, global identity, just a few of those things. Also, wars and rumors of wars. But I'm going to focus mostly on Israel and the Middle East today. There's a lot going on. We'll talk about the death of Raisi. We'll talk about some of what led to the title, the legal and judicial avalanche against Israel. That's coming out with some of the things there, some of the things going on with Gaza. And then maybe if we have a little time, talk about sort of the unforgotten fronts that Israel's facing. And then another one that some people are noting. It's absolutely insane. So I'm not going to get through everything today. I can assure you of that. That is a prophecy that will be fulfilled today. But so this week I'm going to do Tuesday afternoon. I think 2:30, 3 o'clock Eastern. I don't know. It may play at 5 o'clock. I'm not sure. Sometime Tuesday. I'll be on Hope for Our Times with my friend Tom Hughes. I've told some of you, or I've mentioned I'm going to be speaking at a church in the Seattle, Washington area on June 23rd. I'll be speaking at their service in the morning and then they're going to have a little carry-in dinner, and then I'll do a prophecy update in the afternoon after that. Right, when people have a full stomach and want to go to sleep and everything, I get to speak again. It's always a wonderful thing. So, and then Wednesday night this week, I'll do a prophecy roundtable with Scott Townsend, Britt Gillette, and Patrick Wood on technology and AI, and I'll be posting notices about that probably today or tomorrow morning. So that'll be 6 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday night. And that'll go for probably a couple hours. It's kind of hard to get all of us to make our points in less than a couple hours. But we just enjoy sitting down and talking through some of these issues. And I think they're important. And then I'm also trying to schedule a whole bunch of interviews with people in Israel and elsewhere about Israel issues. And so just pray that all those come together. And if I ever have time, I'll do a midweek update, but I haven't had time lately. It's kind of hard to manage all of this and maintain, what's that thing we call personal life? A little difficult. So today, again, just a reminder, this is the grid that I use. Acceleration, convergence, logistics, understanding. Things are going to happen quickly. They're going to happen all at the same time. But then there's some logistics, and I may have a little bit on a logistics issue that I see in Bible prophecy near the end, and then understanding as we get closer to the end, these things will become clearer because they'll be happening. It'll be more apparent that these prophecies are actually going to be fulfilled, and at some point, people are going to be able to come in and say, "This is that which was prophesied." Now, I think that's a very difficult thing. I'm reluctant to do that. I have, I see, as I mentioned to you, I get lots of emails, and it's interesting. People study, they're good people, but very rarely is there agreement. And I have friends they're identifying the Antichrist, and it's about 5 different guys right now. So One of them is not wrong. And then, and I may talk a little bit, the logistics thing is about a potential a view on Babylon, which I do not reject, but there's a logistical aspect to it. And as somebody sent me a message this week and said, yeah, there's a 1,000 opinions on Babylon, and 999 of them are what the final Babylon of Bible prophecy is, but 999 are at least are wrong. And it may be that all 1,000 that people have come up with are wrong. I don't think it's 1,000, but everybody has an opinion, and so we know that this is going to be become more apparent as we get closer. And I talk about this on how I view the horsemen sort of increasing over time as the seals are broken and more of the scroll is revealed. But I think parts of the scroll are revealed as each seal opens. Because why? Well, the seal opens, and then what do we have? We have all this information about what happens at the first seal. And the second seal opens, and what do we have? We have all this information about what happens at the second seal. Some people say, oh, no, the scroll won't be revealed until all the seals are open. But then why do we have this progressive disclosure of what's happening in the seals? So that's just, again, how I see it currently. Okay. So we're going to, as I said, focus more this week on the Middle East, and then this is sort of my beginning of my Middle East chessboard as things are moving around on the chessboard. And boy, things are moving around very quickly. The biggest news of this week, though, was the death of President Raisi of Iran, in a helicopter crash that I had talked about last Sunday. The helicopter disappeared. Took them quite a while to get to the helicopter, about 17 hours. And of course, when somebody, I think one thing that's apparent in the world today is that nobody believes that anybody dies a natural death. You know, that if somebody dies, there's some kind of conspiracy about it. For example, there was this young PGA Tour professional who died yesterday. And now everybody's saying, well, it was because he did this, he took this particular medical treatment in his life, or it was this. And everybody knows, but nobody dies a natural death. And boy, in a country that really operates on conspiracy theories, a couple of the biggest countries for that, by the way, are Turkey and Iran. And so the president of Iran dies in a helicopter crash, and immediately there are a whole bunch of theories. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened, as far as we know, and then some of the implications of that. What does this mean? Because we know that Iran is important in Bible prophecy. There are a number of prophecies that have not yet been fulfilled. For example, there is the prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49 about Elam. I think Bill Salas will be on Tom Hughes tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern. They're going to talk about this, and Tom and I are going to talk about the Middle East a lot on Tuesday also. Bill Salas believes that the prophecy in Jeremiah chapter 49, I'm not going to take time to read it here, is a prophecy that's yet to take place. And I tend to agree with that. Now, the question is, how does that play out, and how does that play into all the other pieces that we see about Bible prophecy related to Persia in the last days? And we see that there's this Persia that's mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39 very prominently. And so you can deduce from that Persia is going to exist at that time. So when does the Jeremiah 49 prophecy, right at the end of the chapter, Jeremiah chapter 49, about Elam, when does that take place relative to all these others? And so it's a little bit difficult, I believe, to piece them all together. It's one of these things where we need to be aware of what's going to happen, and then we need to be aware of how it fits in, but we sort of, I don't think we can plant our flag too quickly. That this is that which was prophesied. I'm not sure that we're there. So Raisi got on this plane or this helicopter. The man you saw there to the right is the foreign minister of Iran. I'm not going to try his name. They had gone to a dam opening up in Azerbaijan on the Azerbaijan border, and he met there with the president of Azerbaijan. And this is kind of a big deal that they were meeting together, because Iran and Azerbaijan have been in sort of a soft war for a while. Iran seems to lean more towards Armenia, that's up there. Russia, I think I'm going to get this wrong. Russia seems to favor Azerbaijan. So what Iran has been trying to do is trying to build back up relations with Azerbaijan. It's a big deal internally in Iran, because in the Middle East, even in the non-Arab countries like Persia, it's an Aryan race, they still have this tribal mentality. And ethnic background is a very big deal. So within Israel, there are a lot of within Iran, there are a lot of Azeris. It's a big minority group. I believe that the wife of the Ayatollah Khamenei is Azeri. But Iran has been more friendly towards Armenia. But what they've done is they've opened a couple of dams along the Azerbaijan-Iran border. That's why Raisi was there to help open a ceremony on this second dam. And to get there, he had flown with the governor of the Azerbaijan province, which is sort of in the western part of Iran. And do you see the red area on the sort of reddish country? That's Azerbaijan. But you see that there's a brown piece that comes down between it. That's part of Armenia. And that's where Armenia and Azerbaijan have been fighting for quite a while. Israel, by the way, seems to support Azerbaijan in that fight, much to the chagrin of people that I know that are very pro-Armenian. They have Armenian people in their family. If you've seen those big houses down Worthington Road called Armenian Estates or Armenian Acres, have you seen those? They're like 14,000 square feet each, with a temple that's a model of a temple in Armenia. By the way, Armenia is probably the first totally Christian country, but they have like one pagan temple. And so the guy who built these houses down here, you can look them up on the internet, made a pool house is a model of the pagan temple that exists in Armenia, which is kind of strange. But there's been this war going on for some time between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So Iran has a focus. Their focus is they want to get rid of Israel. That's their focus. And they will do anything and everything that they can do to get rid of Israel. One of the things that they do is they try to keep peace with their neighbors. So this has been an area, which is part of the Caucasus region of the Middle East, has been an area of conflict for centuries. It was back in about 1830, I believe, that there was actually a war between Russia and Persia that Russia won. And the treaty that they signed was pretty harsh on Persia, later Iran. And we know what happened with Iran. There was a revolution in Iran in 1979 when the Shah of Iran, who the United States had helped come to power back in the early 1950s, he was run out of office, run out of the country in 1979, and the Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile in France to finish the Islamic Revolution. And so they have the Islamic Republic of Iran that's born in 1979. The timing is interesting relative to what happened to President Raisi this past week. He was flying on a Bell, and I've heard different stories. It was either a Bell 212 or a Bell 214 model helicopter, which you see a representation of there. I think the particular helicopter that Raisi was on, there were 3 helicopters in the convoy that left Azerbaijan to fly back to Iran. 2 of them made it, 1 did not. That helicopter that Raisi was on, as best as I can determine, was a helicopter that had been sold by Bell, a U.S. company, to the Shah of Iran in 1971. So it's 50-some years old. Now, there are a lot of old aircraft around the world. I mean, our refueling tanker fleet is being updated in the United States, but we still have a lot of old, the equivalent of Boeing 707s, which you haven't seen in passenger service for a very, very long time, but they're still being used by the military. And, as long as things are maintained, aircraft can last a very long time. But Iran has been under sanctions from the United States for decades in one form or another. One of those sanctions is that aircraft manufacturers are not allowed to sell parts to Iran. If they do, they get in big trouble with their banking and that type of thing, and sanctions are imposed on them just like they were the Iranian regime. As a result of this, the aircraft status in Iran is pretty bad. A lot of the fighter jets that they have, I don't believe Russia has sold them any updated fighter jets yet. I could be wrong on that. I don't think they have talks about it, but I don't think that's actually happened because Russia needs their fighter jets right now because you may not have noticed, but Russia's in a war with a country called Ukraine. So the fighter jets that Iran has are F-14s that were bought back during the Shah reign before the 1979 revolution. So Iran really doesn't have much of an air force. Now that raises a number of questions. Why are we worried so much about Iran if they don't have an air force? Well, what Iran has done is they've created an industry with drones and missiles and that sort of thing. By the way, with a lot of assistance from North Korea. In North Korea, they do a lot of development and they get a lot of money from China. They sell that technology and information. You might remember back in 2007, North Korea was helping Syria build a nuclear reactor on the Euphrates River. In the area, by the way, that ISIS took over during the days of ISIS in 2015 to 2017. Israel destroyed that reactor, but it was the reason they could tell what it was that they were building was because it was a carbon copy of a nuclear reactor that intelligence knew about in North Korea. So Israel decided we can't have Syria developing nuclear weapons. Can you imagine what would have happened if Syria developed nuclear technology, developed nuclear weapons, and then ISIS took over? That would be it would be a disaster to have Syria in charge of that stuff, let alone having Syria and, let me close down my one. Rather than having just Syria have it, to have ISIS have it, that would have been very bad for all the world. So the helicopter was not in good shape, supposedly was foggy, at least we think it was foggy. That's the reports. It took them once they were able to identify where the crash site was, it's still from the time that they figured that the helicopter had crashed till they found it was they got there was about 17 hours. The reason they found it was that Turkey, who doesn't seem to be a big, huge friend of Iran, Turkey used one of their drones with heat-seeking infrared technology to locate the crash site because there had been an explosion and fire when it crashed. There was also, apparently, when they thought that the helicopter was down, they started calling the cell phones of the people on board the helicopter, and one of them answered. And then his cell phone went dead, and he was later found dead. So this was a big deal. So it took 17 hours to find the Iranian president. And by the way, there are reasons why people believe conspiracy theories, because there are reasons to believe them. For example, and I don't know how this plays into it, okay? I don't have the secret knowledge to unlock what happened here, but there are websites that have very detailed weather information. And so you would be able to tell if in this area fog had rolled in, what the ceiling was, how dangerous it would be to be flying an aircraft in that area. And helicopters and fog don't go together very well. Example would be Kobe Bryant. Helicopter crashed on a foggy day in Southern California because, well, you can't see the mountain in front of you and you crash into the mountain. This is what happened to Raisi. And so people say, well, the other two helicopters were okay, so somebody must have had it in for this particular helicopter. And that's true. And you can't, though, go and find the weather information because it's been removed from the website. So like a couple hours before the helicopter was flying through there and for about 12 hours after, that weather information appears to not be available on the internet. Now, why is that? I don't know. Well, somebody didn't want people to be looking at that. So there are, for example, here's the National, which is the United Arab Emirates, controversial figure who guided Iran through turbulent times, Raisi. I think it's fair to say that on the scale of how charismatic a leader Raisi was, that if you scored on a 0 to 10 scale, Raisi's charisma would probably put him like at a 2. He just wasn't very charismatic. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Jonathan Spire has a great information. So Raisi dies, everybody's upset. They have this big funeral that happens. I mean, here's a picture of the funeral in Tehran at one of the mosques. I think this is at the Khomeini Mosque in Tehran. And you can see there's just thousands and thousands of people. And, they're sort of wrestling the coffin there, that as they bring him out. And in that coffin, there's a bag of his remains. It was not, I think it would be safe to say the body was not intact when they found it. And these are the other 8 people that died, including the guy on the right who is the foreign minister. Now, so the regime has said, look at how wonderful this is. Look at the unity of the Iranian people, that they are so supportive of the regime. And we know that this is just a big lie, a big bunch of propaganda that they're pushing out there. Because the reaction to Raisi's death, when it was announced, was there were people that reacted like this. Some of them may have reacted like this because they would figure that this is a way to gain favor with the regime, which is something you might want to do if you lived under a repressive regime like the Iranian regime. There are others, and I have videos, I don't have time to play them this morning, of Germany and the UK and other places where there are Iranian immigrant communities. By the way, you got to remember that there are Iranian immigrant communities in these other countries where there are a lot of people like that. There are a lot of immigrants. That explains a lot of things. I remember, and I don't want anybody to say that there was anything racial about this comment that somebody made to us in the UK. But when we came back into the UK, somebody commented, or we had been up in central highlands of Great Britain, and we came back to London for a few days. And as we're driving into London, I have to tell you, it's shocking. It's shocking. And so the comment was made, so now we're in London and it's time to play our favorite game. Can you spot a real Englishman? And I'm telling you that is not, sometimes something is humorous because it's so true. And it's shocking. In the area around our hotel, which was near Speaker's Corner, the Marble Arch in, now I'm going to forget the name of the park there, Hyde Park. At our hotel, there were 50 TV stations available on the cable. 10 of them were Arabic language. In the area around our hotel, it was Turkish, Iranian, Iraqi. There was an Iraqi restaurant. I didn't know Iraqi had like a food group. I just don't know that. I'm totally ignorant on that. Afghanistan. There was a Thai shop that was Turkish. It was called Turkish Thai Shop. And it was like, we're right in the heart of London. Like across Hyde Park is Buckingham Palace, and it's like we're in the Middle East more than we are in London. And there were ladies walking around in full hijabs. I mean, where you could only see a little bit of the eyes. So this is an issue, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. So they have this thing with the funeral and everything. Here's a picture of some of the funeral that takes place in Raisi's hometown in Mashhad. And this is the same area. He was popular with, or well known to the Ayatollah Khomeini, because this is the same area that Khomeini is from. Raisi was 63 when he died. Khomeini is 85. And process that, we wonder about our presidential election where a 78-year-old is running against an 80-year-old. Well, the guy who runs Iran is 85 and has cancer and does it, if you ever notice him, when he doesn't have use of, I think it's his right arm, because I had a lot of nerve damage and other damage in an assassination attempt. So there was a big ceremony to bring Raisi to his resting place in Iran. And this is Islamic culture. Funerals are a big deal, as you can see. Now, I don't know if they had something like this when they had the funeral of Muhammad, the prophet. You know that there is a mosque in Medina called the Prophet's Mosque, where Muhammad is buried, and his body is there to this day. This is very different from Christianity, where there is no body that can be exhumed from the ground. And you can see everybody's very emotional. But in these other cities, in the UK and Germany and everything, people were setting off fireworks and celebrating the death of Raisi, who was known as the Butcher of Baghdad. So clearly the supreme leader is Khomeini on the left. We have Raisi on the right. Raisi was 63, as I said. And Iranian politics, they almost make Israeli politics look very simple and uncomplex. So this is sort of a flow chart that I pulled off somebody's video showing that they have unelected parts of the government and elected parts of the government, but the voters elect some of the people who make decisions for the unelected part of the government. Does that make sense? In other words, it's a big mess. So Raisi was elected. Well, let's put it this way. He was selected. If you remember, there have been a number of presidents of Iran. So Raisi was elected back in 2021. He was supposed to stand for election again next year. Prior to that, for 8 years, they had Rouhani. And for the 8 years prior to that, they had Ahmadinejad. Remember him? I'm mad about jihad, we used to call him. Ahmadinejad. And Ahmadinejad was kind of crazy, but he was allowed to be the president for 8 years. He was selected to be elected. Same way with Raisi, same way with Rouhani. And there was a recent time, so this was reported in the Middle East Eye earlier, I think last year, that Raisi won expert assembly election because why? Well, all of his rivals were removed from consideration. And that's a pretty easy way to win an election, is to make sure that the person that you're running against can't run. Or better yet, make sure that everybody you could run against in a particular election can't run. Then it's kind of a lock, And I don't know if they have election return programs and shows and polls and all this stuff in Iran. I doubt it, because everybody pretty much knows how it's going to go. But Raisi is out of the picture now. There's also, Iran has this military, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and as I've mentioned many times before, Iran kind of runs a little bit like kind of reminds me of the way they divide up the territories among the families in The Godfather. And so the Iranian Revolutionary Guard will control a fortune of $25-30 billion to fund its operations. And these guys are ideologically committed to jihad and taking out Israel and causing trouble all over the place. So they're not really in it for the money. They're in it for they want the money so they can further their ideology. By the same token, the Ayatollahs, with the supreme leader, controls a fortune of something rivaling the fortune of Bill Gates, $100 billion. But from all the things I've read, he lives very modestly. He doesn't live in abject luxury, but he controls a lot of money. If you remember, there was a president of Iran who himself was a imam, Rafsanjani. I think he's passed away now. Rafsanjani controlled a fortune of about $25 billion at the time of his death. But that was done to further the aims of the Islamic Revolution. So here's another little graphic. Well, here's another one. The death of the president, this is from The Economist the other day, the death of the president changes the power dynamic in Iran. Now, the big question will be, what's going to happen? How's this going to change anything? The answer is probably not very much. The Ayatollah is still in charge. There was pretty good evidence here's another graphic, I think, from the Washington Post, that if you're really interested in Iranian politics, will kind of give you some ideas as to how everything goes, but it all revolves around the supreme leader who's appointed by the council of experts and that type of thing. And he's guys there are moms and that type of thing, and they make decisions. And so one of the decisions they're going to be making, I mean, Khomeini's 85, he's not going to live forever. And he knows this, and so Raisi was probably the leading candidate. So even within Iran, there's a lot of what we would say finger pointing. This is a editorial cartoon from a newspaper. Everybody's pointing the finger as to who really caused the helicopter to crash. Now that graphic, by the way, is not accurate because it only had 2 rotors on it, not 3. And Raisi, though, was important to the regime. He furthered the regime. This is an article from The Cradle. Now, Cradle is a very anti-Western, pro-Russian, pro-Iran magazine. For example, there's a guy that writes, they're probably their biggest guy who writes for this guy named Pepe Escobar, and he's a leftist, pro-Islam. But, read him if you don't want to drink coffee in the morning, you want to get your adrenaline going, you can go read Pepe Escobar. But here it says, Raisi led the charge for Russia, Iran, China's New World Order. And this is a big deal. He was also prominent. This is him meeting with, what's the guy in Venezuela, Maduro? Spreading, by the way, in Venezuela. And we have all these people coming across our border. This is a big, big problem. So here he is. He's meeting with all these people, and he was also big at getting Iran and Russia back on track. Because Russia and Iran have always been at loggerheads, especially after that war that happened in the 1800s. It was a humiliating defeat for Iran. So here's Putin meeting with Ayatollah Khomeini, and everybody thinks everything's going to continue. By the way, one of the side things that's going on is that Russia and Iran have agreed to this rail corridor that's going to bypass like the Suez Canal and that type of thing. It's going to make people make their trade go up through Russia and into Europe from the east instead of going through and so there's the competing trade corridor, though, that happened at the G7 meeting last year with the Middle East, India, Middle East, European trade corridor that would go across Saudi Arabia, Israel, Jordan, those countries. So there's a lot of political dynamics going on here. And some of these really have a big impact on Bible prophecy. But you can see they want to make this corridor. Now, this is a road that they're talking about. They go from Basra. They're building a big port there. I'll talk about that if I have time here towards the end. So everybody and their brother was there at Raisi's funeral, including some rather not so great guys. Here is Khomeini. I believe the guy there that's in the picture may be the new acting president of Iran. They have to have election in about 50 days. And in terms of charisma, he's probably a little bit lower on the scale than Raisi, and I'll explain that in a moment. But there's Hania, the well-coiffured, the guy with a great-looking beard, the Palestinian leader that lives in Qatar, multi-billionaire, and you can see he gets his hair done every day. So in the meeting there with Hania, Khomeini was saying, listen, we're committed to this. So now we've got the panel of experts. They're going to make a decision. Who did it? Everybody's got this opinion. There's a great article in the Jerusalem Post Friday by my friend Jonathan Spire, Death of a Dispensable Statesman. And he starts off, Jonathan is a great writer and he's very knowledgeable. And so he says in 1942, German playwright and poet Bertolt Brecht wrote a short poem entitled On Hearing That a Great Statesman Has Fallen Ill. The poem goes like this: if the indispensable man frowns, two empires quake. If the indispensable man dies, the world looks around like a mother without milk for her child. And if the indispensable man were to come back a week after his death, in the entire country, there wouldn't be a job for him as a half porter. So he's indispensable. And listen, I personally went through this. I left my law firm a couple of years ago. And I'd watched guys as I got closer to retirement age. I had one partner who passed away suddenly from a heart attack, and I just sat next to him at a meeting. He was 61, a marathon runner. He had a heart attack and died. He was in great shape. And it was interesting because I watched, and what happened? I mean, everybody would say he's indispensable. He's an important part of the firm. And he dies, and they say something nice about him at the next firm retreater meeting. We all miss him. And then within a couple of weeks, somebody's in his office, and within a month, his cases have all been reassigned to somebody else, and it's like he never existed. And so this poem from this German playwright is exactly correct. We think that people are indispensable. So listen to what Jonathan said. I was reminded of this poem upon hearing the death of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. The late president was the lucky beneficiary of a process underway over the last decade in which Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has ensured the advance of ideological hardliners of Raisi's type at the expense of more capable but less zealous technocrats. That's a very, very astute observation. By the way, it probably applies to most governments in the world. It's not the most capable person who gets advanced. It's Joe Biden, right? It's a technocrat. So, the intention of this effort is outlined in the second phase of the Islamic Revolution, and this is a document that's on Khamenei's website, published in 2019, is to ensure the continuation and rejuvenation of the ideological and religious outlook underlying the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Khamenei, as Saeed Golkar, a US-based Iranian academic, told me, wants to see his ideological regime outlive him. Why? Because that's the only legacy this guy's going to have. He may control a fortune of $100 billion, but it's only if the revolution outlives him that he has any place in history. And this is what Khamenei was thinking of. The result, however, has been the ascent of individuals of mediocre abilities whose only qualification for occupying their senior positions is their unwavering ideological commitment to the regime. Raisi exemplified this process and was perhaps its most senior beneficiary. The late president's main claim to senior office rested on his reputation as a zealous prosecutor general in the late 1980s. At that time, Raisi became known as an enthusiastic member of a four-man team whose task was to sign death warrants for opponents of the regime held in regime prisons. And one commentator I saw this week said, it's very bad if you're imprisoning your political opponents. Like this grandmother I saw this week. She stood and prayed by an abortion clinic door. She's going to prison for 30 months, federal prison. And she's like 80. Others have been sentenced to 11 years. So I'm just saying there seems to be an affinity between the people who are running our government right now and the people who run the government of Iran. And that seems to explain why our government is so intent on promoting Iranian, what the Iranians want to do. That and money. I think there's a lot of money and gas money involved. And I'm working up a talk on the gas money. There was some documents released to Congress this week that showed that when a whistleblower came forward to say, hey, you guys look at what they're doing with Iran, like an FBI whistleblower, And there was a meeting at the Obama White House, this is 2015 or 2016. This guy was castigated. Loretta Lynch, who was no friend to anybody as an attorney general, she was like upset. And then some guy came along and intervened in this whole process, and it kind of disappeared. And that person was the guy who was the Secretary of State at the time, John Kerry, who was very good friends with Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran at the time. And one went to one of the other's daughter's weddings. They were that close. And Mike Benz at Mike Benz Cyber has a great video they put up back in October last year saying, folks, there's all kind of gas money flowing around here, and people in Washington are getting their cut. That's why it's the only explanation that you can give for why we're so pro-Iranian in our State Department and other situations. And so the whistleblower was like, I don't know what happened to him, but the whole thing got covered up like it never happened. Now the documents are resurfacing. And that's why there's, I think, a big push to keep a certain candidate from winning in the fall election, whether you think he's a good guy or not, because they think he'll uncover a lot of this stuff. And believe me, the people who support him are gearing up like I have never seen. You do lawfare to us, we do warfare lawfare on you. That's what I'm hearing coming out of the election. Depending on how it goes, I don't know how it's going to go. So Raisi he was a technocrat. He served function. He had no charisma, but he did what he needed to do. He got these relationships cemented with Iran and Russia and Iran and China, became part of the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, became part of some other things with the Central Asian Stan republics, and was one of the movers behind either a 25 or 40-year deal with China to supply gas to China. And now China and Russia are trying to get the U.S. dollar out as being the reserve currency. So now that Raisi is gone, as this article, Khamenei was president before he became supreme leader. This threw the whole future of Iran into the air. Raisi was considered one of the two most obvious candidates to replace Khamenei. Now there is only one, the son of the current supreme leader, this guy, and he's coming out. His name is Mojtaba Khamenei. Fairly secretive. He's the second son of Khamenei. Now, people have not wanted this to happen because if this happens, it turns the Iranian Republic away from this great people's revolution to sort of a republican monarchy, where you get the position because you're the son of the guy who had it before you. Doesn't base on your competence. Raisi was apparently being groomed to replace him. And here's some video of Mojtaba. And he's sort of secretive. I mean, people know about him, but see him here, he's marching and that sort of thing. So what might be learned, Spire says, from the advance of mediocre ideologues to the top ranks of the Iranian regime at a time when Iran is just emerging from a period of great internal instability. And one of the examples that Jonathan Spire cites is General Soleimani, who was taken out in an airstrike during the Trump administration. And remember, what did Iran do when that happened? Your look tells me that they didn't do anything. There was no big retaliation or anything. By the way, in the context of what's been going on in the world, everybody says, well, Israel did it, the Mossad did it. But the Mossad's never taken out a head of state in all the assassinations that it's done. Plus, they took out an Iranian Revolutionary Guard guy in Damascus back on April 1st. And remember, there was a big attack by Iran in response. I just don't think when Israel's facing war in its north and in Gaza that they're going to take out a head of state. That's just my assessment of it. But Jonathan Spyer's point about Soleimani is everybody thought Soleimani was indispensable to how all of this was going. He had the relationships, he met with people, he traveled, he did all of this, just like Raisi's been doing. But what happened? Nothing changed when Soleimani died. Iran, the revolutionary Islamic Jihad that they want to foment and get rid of Israel, continued like nothing had happened. I mean, there were some bumps for a while. In Israel, they take out nuclear scientists. They take out this leader, that leader, and what happens? Iran continues to march forward. So Jonathan notes that there are 5 fronts. As a result, Iran has consolidated its control of Lebanon and Iraq, dominates a large part of Yemen, and has freedom of action in most of Syria. It has used the array of militias to launch a limited war against Israel and its Western allies, which is being waged on 5 fronts. You have Gaza, you have Lebanon, you have Syria, you have Iraq, and you have the Houthis in Yemen. And it's a problem. So this guy was not indispensable. Foreign policy has a big article. Raisi's funeral has exposed the 2 Irans. And one is that, well, we don't really care that much about the common people. It's a group of elite technocrats who run Iran. The common people get crushed, but they're trying to portray this as a unified Iran in response to Raisi's death. And so here is Cayenne International. Glorious funeral showed revolutionary spirit is alive. By the way, the editor of Cayenne International, an Iranian paper, is appointed by the supreme leader of Iran. I'm sure you're shocked to hear that. Here's an editorial in the Times of London. Rest assured, the running of our country will continue as normal. And there, what do you see? Iran with his foot on women. And so here is the foreign minister, Amir Abdullahian, and he was the same way. He's a hardliner. Here he is. He was very close to Soleimani. He kind of comes from that Revolutionary Guard. He's a big guy. He's like 6'6" or 6'7". That's why he can look Assad in the eye. Assad's like the same, is a pretty tall guy too. The difference being that about 14% of Assad's height comes from his neck, but that's... and here he is, he's meeting with Hania, and here he is in Lebanon meeting with the head of Hezbollah. And you see Hezbollah, we're pro-Iranian, right? Or we're pro-Lebanese. But we have pictures of Khamenei and Khomeini hanging in Hezbollah's living room. But, you know, this guy had probably more charisma than Raisi did. So I don't think anything's going to change. That's sort of a long way of saying nothing's going to change. But I think it's important to look at the dynamics that go on, because we need to understand that these countries are talked about in Bible prophecy, so we know they're going to exist. We know they're going to have power. So what happens to Raisi or Soleimani or the foreign minister is headline worthy for a while, and everything moves on because there's a bigger picture in play. So now the ICC has issued, so there were some other things that happened this week. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israel and Hamas leaders because they're fair. This was from the one of the, I think, a Jordanian paper. And of course, this was from Haaretz, which is not in favor of Netanyahu. ICC threat shows how the Prime Minister Netanyahu's strategic ineptitude will haunt Israel for years. More about that later. And this guy named Khan, who is a British lawyer, who said, okay, we need to issue these arrest warrants. In Germany, somebody in Germany came out and said, hey, look, if you issue the arrest warrant and Netanyahu comes to Germany or he has a plane change in Germany, we'll arrest him. Now, the Chancellor of Germany came out and said, no, well, maybe not. But there are about 120 countries that subscribe to the International Criminal Court. And so that limits the movement of the Israeli leadership. And so they are going to issue warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant, the defense minister, as well as Sinwar and a couple other of the Hamas leaders. So here's Khan shaking hands with his friend Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, a Holocaust denier of the first rank. In fact, his PhD dissertation in Russia at University of Moscow was that there really wasn't the Holocaust that was like what we think it was. And he's the head of Palestine, the Palestinian Authority. He's so good, he's now serving, the 17th year of his 4-year term? Or it may be longer than that. But I looked into this Khan guy. I'm not going to play you the interviews. Christian Amanpour at CNN, as only she can do. Boy, as soon as somebody's anti-Israel, she's on their doorstep for an exclusive interview, and it makes her one of the more loathsome, disgusting people in the media. And that's saying something, right? So Khan, and I got this from a Melanie Phillips article, is a Muslim, Ahmadi Muslim. It's a non-terrorism, but they still believe in jihad. But, we're going to do it by persuasion and that type of thing. So Melanie Phillips has a couple of great articles this week. And again, I don't have time to go through them. You can look them up and read them. Go to her Substack, Melanie Phillips Substack, and you can find these. You can subscribe and get more detailed articles. And she just says, wickedly perverse moves should sink the ICC. And she says, this is crazy because what are they doing? They're treating Netanyahu and Gallant as the equivalent of Sinwar, the head of Hamas. This is insanity. But Khan, he'll have a job. He's running around, does this. In addition to that, the UN top court called the International Court of Justice, they're both located in The Hague. I don't know if I have a picture of. I know I copied it, but I don't think I pasted it into my presentation. A picture of they're both UN related organizations. And so the UN top court, the International Court of Justice, which has had hearings. I played you a clip of some of the hearings that took place last week, where Israel was defending itself, what was going on in Gaza, presenting facts to the court. And the court doesn't care. The court ruled 13-2. There's a judge from Uganda and an Israeli judge who voted against what the International Court of Justice wants to do. And they're telling Israel, well, you need to stop your operation in Rafah. Now, there's a lot of question. What do they really mean? It's kind of fuzzy, some people say. Israel must immediately, so this is what it says. Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in Rafah which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So that's what this judge from the International Criminal Court said. And so people in Israel, everybody's arguing about it. Does it really apply? It doesn't. People are denouncing it. A great interview on ABC with Ron Dermer, who went into this. The Washington Post this morning says U.S. is an outlier on the ICJ ruling on Israel. And what's it saying? This is where some Bible prophecy principles kick in. Israel's being increasingly isolated. The world is turning against Israel. And the Washington Post says, the U.S. is kind of going along with it, it seems like, because we're against what the International Court of Justice is doing. And you begin to think, well, maybe the Washington Post isn't, so friendly to the United States, which I think we all knew that originally. But this is interesting. As this operation is going on in Rafah, this is Haaretz. It's a left-wing newspaper, and you can get subscribed to both the New York Times and Haaretz for one low price. Get all your left-wing stuff out of the way with one subscription. But other countries came out, for example, Norway, Spain, and Ireland came out and said, we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. Never has been one. There isn't one right now, but they're going to do it anyway. But this is where this seems to be heading. In connection with that, though, Israel released videos. I'm going to play part of it. It's been heavily edited. This is a video of October 7th of Hamas capturing female Israeli Defense Force soldiers. And you can imagine what's going through their minds at the time. They're still captive if they're still alive. They're taking pictures of them. They're doing this intentionally. I think that violates Geneva Convention and that type of thing. I have friends in and so these were female soldiers, and they were down there watching the border. And this is what happens. And so, and this is interesting. This is a publication. This is the Persian Jewess on Twitter. She's from Persia, but she's Jewish, hence Persian Jewess. An incomplete compilation of 4 separate times, Hamas recorded themselves saying the women they kidnapped, Sabaya, which means sex slave, spoil of war. In footage filmed by Hamas of the girls kidnapped from Nahal Oz, one of the worst kibbutz of the kibbutzim attacks, one of the Hamas rapists points to the kidnapped girls who are bleeding with their hands zip-tied behind their backs and says, here are the Sabaya, which means sex slave, spoil of war. Now, there are additional videos, okay, but do you understand what's happened to these women? And here, this is where you see, remember the gal with the bloody pants being put into the Jeep? And I think we know why she had bloody pants, given what these guys were saying. And all these people out there are like, oh, there's no proof of any of this happening. This is all made up. This is all AI generated. People have lost their minds. I want to sit Ilhan Omar down in a chair and make her watch this and make her deny it in public. That will tell you what a lying, evil person she is. So this is going on in Gaza. An interesting article, the Israelis proved Biden wrong on Rafah. I talked a little bit about this yesterday. Remember, there was this thing like, oh, you can't go into Rafah. You have all of these refugees in Rafah, and you're going to take out all of those people. So what did Israel do? Israel said, leave. So guess what? People left. So here's what they looked like before Israel gave the order. This is what they look like now. The refugees all left. And the United States said, well, it can't be done. It's not possible. And again, this is the border with Egypt and all the things. So Melanie Phillips has another article on her Substack this week, and it's titled, How the Hamas Pogroms Galvanized Israel's Enemies. But look at the picture that she chose to include with her article. So, now I love Melanie Phillips. She's a fantastic writer. Highly recommend that you follow her and read her stuff. The war to destroy Israel only exists because for decades, Britain, America, and Europe have willed it so. She's exactly right. Go listen to videos. There's a YouTube channel called Truth for Consequences, and a guy, I'm trying to get an interview with him. Pray that comes about. Dr. Francisco Gil-White. And he will tell you that we've been funding Iran for a couple generations. Now, when we get caught, we say, oh, well, that was a mistake. And Dr. Gil-White says, why is it that all of your mistakes always operate to benefit Iran? Well, go listen to Mike Ben's Cyber on Twitter, and you will, from his October videos, and you'll find out there's a lot of money involved. Remember all the stuff I talked about with Dr. Amos Hochstein, and how he shut down Israel's pipeline to transport gas to Europe? And it just so happens that when the Russian-Ukraine war started and Russia's gas is sanctioned and Europe needs gas from someplace else, the only way to get gas there is liquefied natural gas. Where did Amos Hochstein work for the 4 years between the end of the second Biden administration and the beginning of the second Obama administration and the beginning of the third Obama administration, sometimes as we call around here, the Biden administration? He was executive vice president for probably the largest liquefied natural gas container shipping company in the world based out of Houston. Now, does it kind of seem like somebody might be benefiting from this economically? Why is John Kerry so big on Iran when somebody's blowing the whistle on it? Well, it costs money to run your private jet to all the climate change conferences. Do the math. Now, this is from the National in the United Arab Emirates. Violence surges in West Bank as Israel moves to the heart of Rafah. And the Biden administration is considering appointing a U.S. official to serve as the top civilian advisor to a mostly Palestinian force when the Israel-Hamas conflict ends, four U.S. officials said. Now, Ben Yishai at Ynet News, he has a pretty good article up about, we don't know if they're really trying to shut down Israel or not. It's kind of a fuzzy order. That doesn't really make much difference as far as I'm concerned, because everybody else thinks that that's what it is. And Ireland and Norway and Spain, they're going to recognize a Palestinian state regardless. So I'm going to play about an 8-minute clip, then I have a few more comments. I'm going to skip all the other stuff, except maybe one thing, or 8, depending on how it goes. This is a lawyer. She's brilliant. From London, UK Lawyers for Israel, Natasha Hausdorff, on Nigel Farage's show on GB News the other day. Here's her interview. I'll maybe play all 6 minutes, but maybe not.
I'm joined in the studio by Natasha Hausdorff, barrister at 6 Pump Court Chambers and director of UK Lawyers for Israel. What an extraordinary catalogue of events in the course of the last 48 hours.
Indeed, and I think the real tragedy here, and one of the key casualties, is the rule of law that we just heard being referred to. What we've seen is a campaign of lawfare across various international legal organisations, not just the International Criminal Court, but we've seen a great deal of this sort of activity at the International Court of Justice, the UN's highest court, and at other UN bodies and institutions. The UN Human Rights Council is a case in point, and of course you've referred to the Security Council.
Yep.
But in the context of this application we have seen by Prosecutor Khan for arrest warrants, if they are in fact issued, I anticipate that the international backlash will be severe, in particular from the United States, on the back of the comments we've seen coming from the administration thus far.
Yes, I mean, the Biden administration have been somewhat equivocal over the events in Gaza, but I think on this, I think you're right. I think on this, and Biden has already said some fairly, at least I think, sensible things. But do you not get the feeling internationally that Israel is now becoming pretty much a pariah state? Running out of friends quickly?
Well, that is the intention behind the parties, I think, fueling these lawfare initiatives. And I should be clear that I think lawfare needs to be called out as an abuse of international law in particular in these contexts. I think it threatens international legal order. And if David Lammy and others, especially here in the UK, as a state party to the Rome Statute, as a member of the International Criminal Court, really care about the impact these developments will have on law-abiding states, we need to be clear about calling lawfare out. In the context of these recent developments, while the intention is to create Israel as a pariah state, I think right-thinking individuals around the world look at the facts, look at the realities of the law, and hopefully see through these politicised initiatives.
Maybe the voting for the Eurovision Song Contest rather proved that point in this country, where the British public put Israel top. So, I mean, there is something there, clearly, in what you say. Coming back to this country for a moment, big march, of course, last Saturday in London, Intifada being chanted in the streets of London. But we're told this week it's all going to change. You know, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, we're going to crack down on these marches in a way we haven't before. Big speech today by Michael Gove, talking about anti-Semitism. Is this a sign that the government are really beginning to wake up to this and to become robust, or should they have done this 6 months ago?
I think the concern here is we've seen a degree of flip-flopping over the last 6-7 months. It's significant that today we had a decision from, I believe, the court, the Netherlands, signifying that from the river to the sea is incitement to hate. Of course, we've had a former Home Secretary clear that this is a genocidal chant, and it remains at the centre of the marches that you've been describing.
So what do we do? What do the police do?
Well, they should be using the powers that they already have in order to better police the law breaking that we are witnessing, which has been continuing on an almost weekly basis along the last 7 months. I mean, it's undeniable that that level of incitement has been contributing not just to the international discourse, but also to the way that the media has been covering this, and it's almost a vicious cycle. One's fueling the other.
And the way that Jewish people are being treated now at universities. I had an example of a friend whose daughter's having a really difficult time in year 1 at university. Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult. I spent 20 years in Brussels and Strasbourg in the European Parliament, travelling between the two, and I watched in Brussels as Jewish people literally left the city. The only Jewish people left were rich people living in gated communities while they had security. I used to walk in Strasbourg into the European Parliament through a Jewish area, predominantly Jewish area of Strasbourg, and see soldiers with guns escorting young kids into their primary schools for protection. Are we in danger, in London in particular, of seeing an exodus of Jewish people saying this is just not a place that we want to live anymore?
I think the question is, where would they go other than Israel? Because we're seeing this replicated all over the world. I've just today come back from Australia, and the time that I spent in Sydney and Melbourne in particular left me with the same unfortunate impressions, and communities all over the world are facing the same challenges, and there are very few governments, they are few and far between, that have been willing to address this robustly, willing to protect the vulnerable in this equation, and ensure that the balance between freedom of speech, which is sacrosanct, and against incitement to violence, racial hatred, and increasingly we're seeing that crossover from speech to violent acts.
So she's right, and I think she would probably agree with me on this law that was passed the House in the United States. I don't know if it's gone any further. That a lot of people said would make sharing the gospel or reading the Bible illegal. I don't think it does, but I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a bad law. Prosecute them for violence and incitement and that type of thing, which are against the law already. I don't think you need this. But so this is also another article. This was on Monday or Tuesday in Haaretz. At this rate, Israel won't make it to its 100th birthday. So there's a report that's coming out. It's going to be published at, I think the acronym is JIPS, Jerusalem Institute for Policy Studies. Should be out soon, but it's written by a couple guys that they're just saying is it doesn't look like Israel's going to survive. And look, when you're looking at this without any supernatural going on, that's not a difficult conclusion to reach. So you might want to get this article. By the way, it was picked up by, I think, the Daily Sabah in Turkey and Al Jazeera. And it's like, doesn't look like Israel's going to make it to 100 years old. It had its 76th birthday recently, but that may be the last time, because it says that Israel's got a few different groups that are, it just doesn't look like Israel's going to make it. In the business as usual scenario in the political configuration today, there is considerable likelihood that Israel will not be able to exist as a sovereign Jewish state in the coming decades. And that's because there are like three groups, maybe really two groups. And I'm not so sure that this doesn't have some application in Ezekiel chapter 37 where it talks about the two sticks. And some commentators have thought that there's going to be a civil war in Israel at some point. And they're just saying that it's just not sustainable. So you have the conservatives, you have the Haredim that don't serve in the military and that get, I don't know how many shekels per year. I think the average family gets 120,000 shekels per year from the government. They don't live, a luxurious lifestyle. And they say, well, we don't serve in the military, but we contribute to Israel because we study Torah and keep Israel on the right spiritual path. To which a lot of the secular Israelis say, baloney to that. So that's, and then there are the settlers and Israel pays all of this, and they're just saying is Israel can't continue to fund this, plus pay all the money out for military and fight these wars. So these guys are saying, we don't think Israel's going to be around very long. Now, there's a lot of scriptures that talk about that are contrary to that. I'm only putting this out there because this is the feeling of a lot of people today, which, in my view, makes the miracle of Israel's continued existence even more amazing. That's how I see it. Sort of like when my friend Bill Koenig. Bill been going crazy lately with all the bad stuff that the U.S. does with Israel and how that's connected to weather events in the U.S. And when you think about it, it's even more amazing because God created the universe and set everything in motion so that when the U.S. government would do something bad against Israel at a particular time when Israel existed, that there would be a storm that would, you understand this, what I'm saying is that everything's wound up so that when the governments do what the Bible says they shouldn't do and violates Genesis 12:3, these weather events happen. But they don't just happen. It's even more amazing when you consider it that it has to all be wound up and timed millennia, and it's in advance of them happening. It's kind of amazing. So here's one comment, 3 challenges. The document presents Israel's 3 existential challenges. The first is economic, the existence of 3 groups that are funded at the expense of others. These are the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, the Arab community, and the settlers. None of the 3 are able or willing to fund their way of life. The authors predict a mass immigration of Israel's productive elite, as in the bank run. In a decade or 2, there will be a run on Israel. And there's a lot of unrest. And so you get the article and read it. It's a well-written article. And I love maps like this. This is a map of the Middle East. You can see Turkey, and you can see the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, Persian Gulf. This is a population density map. So you can see where all the people live. I'm always fascinated by these. So you can clearly see where Istanbul is, right? You can see whatever the cities are down here on the Aegean Sea. You can see Cairo, you can see Tel Aviv, you can see Lebanon, Beirut. And it appears that Saudi Arabia, Sheba Dedan in the Bible, is a little bit empty, at least in the northern part. Not a lot of people there. And you can see that line right here. That's the Euphrates River. So I have a bunch of stuff on potential Babylon in Iraq, and a lot of the things that are going on there that everybody's excited about. I'm not that excited about them, so I'm going to let them go because nothing's happening there this week. They can't wait. If the Babylon of Bible prophecy is in Iraq, there's a logistical problem right now. Can we agree? We can agree on that, I think. There's nothing there right now. Now, they're building a big port at the northern end of the Persian Gulf, and they're building a road and that type of thing. But Babylon is about 300 miles inland, and there's some talk of spending $1 billion or something, but that's nothing in today's market. But this is interesting because they want this Palestinian state. This is how insane the world is. Oh, we'll just do a Palestinian state. Now, they want to go all the way to the Jordan River, but the green area there is Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Israel has not given up the Jordan Valley. No way, no how. By the way, I'll do longer talks on this in the future. There was supposed to be a Jewish state here, east of the Jordan, west of the Jordan, and an Arab state to the west. It was a 2-state solution. Somehow that morphed back in the 40s into, well, we'll split up the Jewish part. It's not going to work. There's just no way. But they'll try. It's just not going to happen. And so there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Like this morning, I think I saw an article in the Washington Post or somewhere that Israel's going to be selling offensive weapons to the United States is going to sell offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia. And by the way, while all this stuff is going on in Iran, everybody asks about Saudi Arabia. What are they going to do? Are they going to agree to anything? Are they going to modify Palestinian state to King Salman? King Salman's in the hospital with pneumonia right now. He's in his 80s. He may not make it, and I'm just saying I think when the king passes away, you're going to see a lot of things happen. So it's 12:30, and I'm going to quit, even though I have some of the most amazing information to share with you. No, it's a holiday weekend, and watch Tom and I on Tuesday. I'm sure we'll talk about some of this. Look, what's the old saying? If Israel is the hour hand, Jerusalem is the minute hand, and the Temple Mount is the second hand on God's end time clock. And I think that's right. And it is going to be a cup of trembling, and we see a lot of that being set up. I may stay and just go through my slides on my own because they're so interesting. but you'll have to wait till my next update. So look, this thing is coming together. If you looked at things naturally, you would have concerns about the future of Israel. I'm concerned about the North. I mean, it's hardly talked about. Now, the Israeli Defense Forces says we're ready to have a war with Hezbollah, but that's going to cause a lot of pain. And there are a lot of people that don't live in the North that used to live there. Villages destroyed, both in northern Israel and southern Lebanon. And you just don't hear about it. It's a big concern. And I'm just telling you, it seems to be unavoidable at this point. And we'll be talking more about that in the days, weeks, months. I almost said years ahead, but who knows? So let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for the blessing that you gave us to live at this time of human history. To see things written about thousands of years ago begin to unfold right in front of our eyes, showing that you and you alone are sovereign, in control. And 2 millennia ago, you sent your Son as the Messiah to die in our place, resurrected, buried, crucified, buried, rose again, ascended to heaven, and coming back to set up his kingdom. Lord, we just are so grateful that you allow us to live at this time. We pray that you will bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.